Joining us now is Professor from RMIT, Joe Siracusa. Thank you for your time, Joe. Now, this has only just come into the newsroom in just the last few moments, but just how serious a development is this of Iran attacking a US military base?
Well, they didn't not only attack the U.S. military base, they probably have a number of coalition soldiers in their crossfire too, or crosshairs. So, you know, we have, I think, 800 Australians are still there, not to mention Poles and others. So, yeah, this is the first shot, and what I'm sure will be a long series of shots in a war that's been going on and off for many, many years. I mean, the leader of the Iranians has actually asked the armed forces to take on the coalition forces rather than using secret forces or proxy forces, so maybe that's what this means too. On the other hand, there is enormous pressure in Iran to do something about the attack on their military commander. I mean, you know, in a sense, the attack on the execution of this guy has brought the Iranians closer together. It's destabilized Iraq and thrown American plans into confusion. And we don't really know what the American plans are. Donald Trump's not talking about long-term strategy because either he wants to keep it a secret or he doesn't have any right now. But look, this is an important development. You know, once you start aiming rockets at people, whether they're ballistic missiles or robots with Hellfire missiles attached to them, you're in the big leagues. And so this is the beginning of something very, very important, or as Winston Churchill used to say, it's the end of the beginning in the sense of something different is going to happen. Now, I tell you this: if Iranians draw blood, coalition blood or American blood, the administration is going to hit them with the kitchen sink. It's quite clear by the Constitution and by American history that presidents make war, Congress declares war, and there's no chance here that Congress is going to have a say in this. Donald Trump's off on his own, along with the Secretary of State Pompeo and the Secretary of Defense and the Armed Forces, and he got the Armed Forces behind him. So look, this is an important development. Once you start aiming missiles at each other after an incident like this, everybody's on notice, and you know, it's a slippery slope because it only goes downhill from here, because what else can you do? The Americans aren't afraid. I was afraid, along with a lot of American generals, that the Iranians would open the cyber terrorist attacks on dams and nuclear facilities and downtown traffic in New York or Wall Street or whatever it is. But if they want to use the high end, if they want to go to conventional weapons to respond to the Americans, and then they've made a mistake here, because the Americans will hit them 10 times harder than they expected.
Of course, I guess there's no guarantee that those cyber attacks won't be forthcoming. Do you find it? I find this really a remarkable move from Donald Trump. He's come in, and one of the things he was so adamant about becoming president was that he wanted to get American troops home. He didn't want to be fighting endless wars overseas. And then this is just such a dramatic escalation in the region.
Yes, it is. Look, our last two presidents, Barack Obama and Donald Trump, 44 and 45, were both elected on the platform of getting America out of the Middle East. Now, we've been there for 20 years, and there was a good reason we weren't there before that. We weren't bogged down with some proxy war with the Soviet Union, is because it is a place of endless wars. It's a place of the Arabian Nights. Americans and a lot of other people have really no cultural background to get involved in these kinds of places. In fact, we get involved as a result of blindness. And you know, I wrote a book that came out last week in New York about going to war with Iraq, the first two wars we've had with Iraq. And I begin the book with a long quote by James Baker, George H.W. Bush's Secretary of State, and says, look, we've got a conflict now with Iraq, and everybody's going to be watching us about how we do this and how we lead the world. So what will the world draw from this? This will demoralize American allies, because they were not consulted about these kinds of things. And it's a further disarray of American policy in the Middle East. But you're quite right. The president said he was going to get out of this, and he can't quite get out of this. Though, you know, at the end of the day, Americans have to go home, whether it's Vietnam, Korea, or West Germany, or Japan. I mean, people have to go home sooner or later. And the Iranians are counting on American impatience, because the American people are naturally very impatient. They want to settle all these things in about 1 hour. Well, it's not going to happen that way. And I'm just afraid that the Pentagon is going to respond in a disproportionate manner. I mean, killing the commander was probably disproportionate. I mean, there are rules. The rules are that the bad guys get to live another day. I mean, we saw that during the Cold War. We didn't try to kill Castro after the one time we tried to kill him, or the leaders of the Soviet Union. And when John Kennedy was assassinated, we made it very clear, the Russians made it very clear that they had nothing to do with it. So that's the kind of policy. It's hands off the leaders, go after everybody else. So we're now in this very dangerous and uncertain world we live in. The world's become a little more dangerous and uncertain. And Australia is going to be dragging this one way or the other as a faithful ally of the United States. It's in lockstep along with a lot of other nations, whether they like it or not. So we're all going to be suffering the consequences. Who's going to win this war? Well, I'll tell you what. The United States has 6,350 nuclear weapons. Iran has 0. So who do you think is going to win this thing at the end of the day? So the idea is to keep the collateral damage down to a minimum and to make sure that the Iranians draw back a little bit. But right now they've had no incentive. You know, they've been bombing installations and oil fields and bringing down drones and living large for the last 40 years off the great Satan. Maybe they're starting to believe their own press releases. But they're up against the United States Armed Forces now, and they're in no mood to take any nonsense from these people. And I think they're going to hit them with the kitchen sink.
I think you might be right. They would have to be enriching that uranium awfully quickly. Do you think, Joe Siracusa, are we being too cynical to think that this move by Donald Trump might have something to do with the fact we are heading to an election very soon in the United States?
Well, look, it's not being too cynical. It's just common sense. Look, in 1846, we had a president that went after Mexico to extend the slave states, and we had Abraham Lincoln started a war, and William McKinley started a war with Spain, and Franklin Roosevelt had his backdoor war with the Japanese. I mean, this goes on all the time. I say once again, the president, because of the nature of the beast, is able to make war. Congress likes to come in later and declare it. Yeah, I think you could be a little cynical here. And war, you know, as you know, Trump has been at war with Congress and the American media since he took office in early 2017, and there are no guardrails anymore. You know, the House of Representatives has made it very clear that he's an unfit and immoral person to be holding office, so he doesn't give a damn what they think, and he's not going to consult them about anything. The Senate is able to hold on and support the president a little bit. The guardrails are off. I mean, there's nothing restraining the president. On the other hand, the recommendations that come through now are coming through from the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense is handing the president various options, whether he wants to choose them. People like Barack Obama had enough courage to tell the Pentagon, I don't like those 5 options. I'm not going to do anything. He'd send them home and go back to the drawing board. And this occasion, Trump took the extreme option and executed it, and he's going to wait to see what happens next. And he's being presidential. You know, only presidents can pull this kind of stuff off. Is it smart presidential? Probably not at the end of the day. But he's being presidential, and he's literally telling the other candidates, you know, match that. And they can't match anything like it. And they start to look weak, and they start to look petty by questioning American motives, particularly after Americans and allied troops start to get killed. I mean, they start to look very small at the end of the day. So the president is doing the things he can do. Now, I predicted on this show and other shows for the past year that the president will do what he wants to do and let everybody else clean up the mess. And now there are no restraints on him. You know, Nancy Pelosi can't knock on his door and ask him, what are you doing? Because he's not going to receive her right now. Because there are no restraints on him, he will act in an unrestrained way. And the armed forces are handing him these options. And keep in mind, your viewers should keep in mind that before it was the Defense Department, it was called the Department of War. That's what the Department of Defense does. It plans wars. It tries to prevent them. But if it can't prevent them, it plans to win them as quickly as possible. And Iraq's going to get a very big black eye at the end of this. But are we going to have the Strait of Hormuz blocked up? Are we going to have oil shipments around the world cut off? Are we going to have oil at $150 a barrel? And look at Australia with its 3-4 weeks of oil reserves. I mean, right now Australia is fighting very hard with bushfires. I mean, it cannot be even get involved in this kind of thing, though it may be dragged into this kind of thing. So everybody's agenda is overwhelmed.